So let's talk a little bit about the future. So let's end by the future and looking ahead. How do you see the technology evolving in international arbitration?
So technology has transformed international arbitration over the last several decades. There was a time, if one thinks back to the 1960s, 1970s, or for that matter, even the 1990s, when arbitration was one of the main sources of business for courier companies like DHL or Federal Express or what have you. Arbitration was conducted by fax and by courier, occasionally by telephone, although telephone conference calls weren't really a thing. Hearings were in person because that's the only way you could have a hearing. The world transformed in the last 20 years, and particularly during and following COVID-19. Emails, at first prohibited by the ICC as a means of transmitting submissions or awards, became the only permitted means of communicating. And in due course, hearings stopped being, at least in some cases, in person and began to be hosted on virtual platforms, whether Teams or Zoom or something else. During COVID, that was the only way you could, in most instances, have hearings. And arbitration, international arbitration, didn't at all stop the way some national courts stopped during COVID. It continued. Caseloads increased. More hearings were conducted. People sometimes had objections to virtual hearings. They sometimes thought they didn't provide a full opportunity to be heard. National courts almost uniformly rejected those kinds of objections, in part because at least many of them were having their own virtual hearings. And the international arbitration community discovered that you could have virtual hearings just about as well as you could have in-person hearings. Post-COVID, for smaller hearings, often without witness testimony, virtual hearings have continued to be very common, in particular for procedural conferences, for closing hearings, closing submissions, for short interim applications and the like. Virtual hearings are the rule, the norm, as opposed to in-person hearings. I expect all this to continue and to become more sophisticated. I think technology to allow virtual conferencing continually improves. And I think ultimately one has to compare the experience, so to speak, of a very, very high quality virtual hearing